Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Dissenting Goyim Show. I appreciate you coming by. Oh, yeah, this is brought to you by Dyed in the Wool History Productions. And let me tell you what, I tried to talk about this a little midweek wisdom, but unfortunately, I couldn't get that video loaded. So here we go today with that same bit of wisdom. Um, Over the past couple of weeks, we have definitely been a little hypercritical as to what President Trump was doing, and rightfully so. Why? Because he went and pulled a president out of his country, took him back to America, put him on trial for, well, charges that aren't really necessarily true. And we can question the morality of his leadership in his country, but not our problem, not our constitution, not our republic. Then he moved on, right? We talked about Iran, we've seen Israel, and it all comes down to the question of hegemony, the control of the globe, the control of the West. What was once a multipolar rule, or well, people like to say rules-based order, or international law, which is really just whatever. It's meant to protect the people that we don't really want it to protect. Um, Now moved on to a unipolar world, right? That hegemony on the globe is ran by one specific group that was once together, but the hypercritical criticality of us against Trump now is starting to make a little more sense, and we get a new perspective of it, right? Over this past week, we have seen the Davos or Davos or whatever in Switzerland, the 2026 annual meeting of the billionaires. And we start to realize that in history, there is a very repeatable cycle. This repeatable cycle revolves around the great game. The great game is I'm not gonna say chess game because I don't want you guys to be thinking about that 5D stuff. Whatever, right? That nuisance. Apparently, people just decided to start getting smart or pretend that they're smart. I'm gonna call it the great game because that's what it was. It existed over control the peripheries of a country or a kingdom or a realm or whatever you want to say. And he who controlled the peripheries tended to then control the core areas. It folded back over. It's Carol Quigley put forward this in 1966. And it's a great book. If you read Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time, he cuts it off short. But nonetheless, it's talking about this. If you control the peripheries, you tend to fold over and you start to control the core areas because the core areas tend to implode on each other because you can't expand capital. You can't do really much from that. Right. And so this great game revolved again, not just around the peripheries, but around also the opium trade. What happened in the South Pacific? If you controlled the East Indies, you controlled generally everything, the finances, you were the entrepot, but you had multiple entrepots, which is why it was multipolar. But because we're a unipolar world and we're still trying to figure out how to navigate that's the whole empire stage of America. We're seeing this happen again. And why? Because we're seeing a group of merchants on the left side of the Atlantic, and we're seeing a group of merchants on the right side of the Atlantic now go after each other. And that's when we start to see what President Trump meant by America first. It wasn't the domestic aspect, it wasn't Americans first, and we need to understand that there's a very distinct difference between America first and Americans first. But regardless, we are seeing who is going to control. We're seeing a battle over who is going to control this world, who's going to control that unipolar. And the question is, and it's all said and done, what is our world going to look like? Is it going to be multipolar or is it going to be unipolar? Who's going to control it? And well, we're kind of seeing the pendulum swing in Donald Trump's favor because he's moved us onto an empire. He's tending to show that he is willing. I think that Venezuela was a show of strength, not just to give a present to our billionaires who want control, but it was to show that, hey, look, your order doesn't work. Your order is weak. And here I am taking care of this. Who is going to protect the world? Who pays for everything? America. Who's going to protect the world? America. And this is where we start to see why people think he's moving away from them, from the platform that they voted on. But realistically, did they understand what they were voting for? And did they get what he meant when he said America first? Now, his speech at Davos proves that he is America first in the world, his ruling class first in the world, the people that support him first in the world, right? He claimed to have all this great things, but you know what really benefited the average American? We can put a lot of question on that because, well, you know, we can talk about interest rates lowering at no inflation as a no inflation. That's, you know, again, that's economically questionable. Do I have more spending power? Probably not. No. Can I afford, again, that goes with spending power. Can I afford more things? Right. Can I go and buy land? No, I can't. Right. So all the things that he's claiming exist at a higher level, but not down to the constituents of what was once the republic, now the empire. Right. But we get to see this. We get to see it in action. We get to understand just by the introduction here, which we're going to show in a minute, that America really is the superpower. And they are winning. Trump is winning, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, at the cost, of course, at the cost of a constitutional republic. But then again, he's not doing anything different than Abraham Lincoln, FDR, right? We're just moving forward in the same stupid cycle, these bad presidents. You know, we don't have a Monroe anymore. We don't have a Jefferson or a Washington. We don't have a John Tyler. We don't have a Stephen Grover Cleveland. We have the imperial age. We got the Lincolns. We got the FDRs, the Teddys. We got the Bushes, we got the LBJs, right? So we need to understand that moving forward, and we need to get what Donald Trump said. But here is a very good introduction to Trump, and the point that even Larry Fink, who I guess is kind of on the side or the middle as far as who he's siding with, you know, because you had Canada and Macron giving these, you know, America bad, this America will fall, the empire's done, and we need to detach ourselves from that. And then you have Larry Fink introduce Donald Trump saying that America is single-handedly the most important country in the globe. So go ahead and take a listen to this real quick, and then we will introduce our guest.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I guess we don't have enough seats today. Wow. In the last quarter century, a sitting president of the United States has come to Davos only twice. Both times it was Donald Trump. So when I asked to serve in this new role that I have, he was one of the first leaders I called and invited to return. I first met the president about 25 years ago, but I worked most closely with him during the early months of COVID. This was March 2020. Markets were under extreme stress. Some economists were warning we could be headed towards a second Great Depression. What stood out to me during the extraordinary period was a president's willingness to bring together people from governments, business, across institutions, across perspectives, to think differently, and importantly, to act decisively. That instinct to act, especially in pivotal moments, is one reason I think he values the World Economic Forum. It is a unique institution that brings together the largest combination of government officials, business leaders, technology leaders, civil society and NGO leaders, anywhere in the world for a genuine dialogue, and particularly importantly, this year. Thankfully, this group is meeting under better economic circumstances than during the pandemic. But once again, we're forcing very serious different economic conditions around the world. One of the central challenges that is impacting me is how capitalism can benefit more, and how can we broaden our global economy for greater and greater participation. That is a question where the president has shown real leadership through investing in infrastructure, reducing barriers to growth, and initiatives like the Trump account, designed to give more Americans a direct stake in the growth of the U.S. economy. As he enters the second year of his second term, we are interested in hearing his plans for 2026 and beyond, and will no doubt create more and more conversation. And that's what the forum is about, a serious conversation in the spirit of dialogue. Discussions where the world is headed, where are we going? And these discussions would be incomplete without the President of the United States, the most important leader in the world. We appreciate him here, so let me introduce and welcome back to Davos the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
And there he is. Now, it is interesting, right? We have these group of people in one room that are like, oh, the orange man, bad. We don't like him. Then you have this guy who says he is the single-handedly most important ruler in the world. Now, to me, that sounds like game over. That sounds like to the other people in the room, knock it off. He's our guy. And we need to be okay with that. We have here again, James the Elder. Welcome back, James the Elder. Each week that you come by and bless us with your wisdom, we love it. People love listening to you. I see that our views are excellent, and sometimes we get some interactions. So, welcome. What do you think of that admission?
It can be taken a couple of different ways, and I think a key question here is the recent events in Iran. So you can take this as a failure on Trump's part, or you can take it as a strategy that worked out brilliantly. And I don't really have the answer, but let's say from the unrest that happened there, the Massoud, probably the CIA, had invested years, perhaps as long as 2 decades, in creating an infrastructure to try to overthrow the Iranian regime, or government regime. Intentionally sounds bad. So overthrow the Iranian government. The protests started off because there was largely because there was an attack on the Iranian currency, the rial, which drove inflation, drove a lot of popular discontent. So that created an opportunity for this infrastructure that had been created there to jump in. And this consists of largely Kurds, Baha'i, and some other minor groups. But it ran according to plan for a while. At the Mar-a-Lago meeting, Trump and Netanyahu apparently had some sort of agreement that what they were going to do. When it got to a critical point, Trump pulled back. Did he do that because he was nervous? Did he do that because of polling? And did he do that because maybe it was a strategy? So at that point, Iran had been able to electronically and otherwise infiltrate and identify the agitators and where the resources were coming from. Then they cut off the internet communication, and the whole thing fell apart. Was this done on purpose in order to stop the endless agitation about attacking Iran, or is it just kind of a mistake? I don't really know, but you can take it both ways.
So I have two thoughts on this one, right? In his speech, he sat there and said, "You know, I told Netanyahu, I told Bibi, quit taking credit for our things, right? Quit telling the world that our Iron Dome or that your Iron Dome is yours. We paid for it. That's our stuff."
It
Right.
doesn't work very well, I might add, but
It
okay.
doesn't work. Yeah, it doesn't work very well. Which he tried to say that the Russian stuff also didn't work very well for when they got it. I think who Denmark or whoever got it. Um, but the point was, it was almost like a, hey, we are not on that same level anymore, right? Because if you look at how Venezuela, look at how Maduro was taken, right? The witness accounts said, multiple helicopters showed up. Then all of a sudden, all the soldiers were essentially sick, right? They were throwing up, and once they went in, got Maduro, got out. So for me, it's like if it was that simple, to carry out an operation like that, right? I assume that to get the leader of Iran, it would be equally as easy. So he maybe, I don't know, right, with that method. uh, I would imagine that this was some kind of note to Bibi, right? And granted, maybe that operation couldn't be the same way in Iran, and I get that, right? I understand. I'll accept that. Um, but I think the idea here is that it was something to Bibi. It was a let it go.
It might be. I can't get inside his head. I am hesitant to assume that everything he does is some sort of genius maneuvering. He has said things in the past, and I'll point out one with COVID, where he was really thinking and saying over and over, "I saved hundreds of thousands of lives with the express vaccine approval." And he just kept repeating it. He didn't get it, didn't know why people were booing him. And this went on for a long time until someone eating dinner with him, I think it was John Rich, said, "Well, most people know someone who was killed or injured by the COVID vaccine." And then Lindsey Graham said, "Oh, don't listen to him. He doesn't know what he's talking about." Yeah, well, he did know what he's talking about. Lindsey Graham's the one you should absolutely never listen to.
Yeah, he's someone that you should, anytime he open his mouth, you tell him to close it. I get that, right? I know we have our disagreement actually over the game here. I don't necessarily think that this one was a smart move. I think it was I'm going to try it and see what happens kind of move. It was it's the same way as, you look at who's meeting with Putin right now. It's Kushner, right? Obviously not a good idea. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know, right? We have this game that's going on though, and we can acknowledge it is a game. And there is a war between these two factions of merchants.
There's a game going on. I'll grant you that.
Right, and it is over the peripheries. We need to figure out what is going on there. Now, watching these speeches actually has been interesting because you start to see you start to see why what has happened. And so looking at that, right, we have Canada, trying to pull themselves apart from the US. Would you say that these adventures that Trump has been on lately, right, with again Venezuela and Iran, I'm always going to come back to that. I'm going to come back to Israel here in a second. Is going to be something that works out in his favor, or is the push away from Canada going to push them towards a bigger, higher, better power? Because he did try to argue that America has the greatest military around and that we could do whatever, and that's just not true. Simply not true. So is this going to lead to something bigger, or are we going to stop this fight here?
I'm really not sure. I'm not concluding that there's not going to be an actual war against Iran, because we're still sending stuff over there. We started that in the beginning of December and just continued. It hasn't abated. So I'm not going to make a prediction about that. There are consequences, though, to what we're the path more aggressive foreign policy path we've been on. Putin made a very significant policy speech this last week that really drew a line in the sand, and it's an old line. It kind of goes back to NATO will be returned to where NATO was in 1981 when the Soviet Union fell. It was significant in a lot of respects, and of course, everything that the Russians say isn't somebody talking on social media. It's thought out, it's debated, and it's a policy statement. It's like a legal precedent. It's not just somebody talking.
Right. I think Putin actually, he he's kind of, I think he's sitting back. A lot of people think that, well, actually I watched one where he was responding to Trump and that, the board of peace board or board of peace or whatever. And the speech was sarcastic, right? It was like, I'll give you $100,000 of the, or whatever, $1 million of the frozen
the money you've already taken from me.
Yeah, the frozen assets, right? So I think at this point, people think he's a lot dumber than he is. And this is where I find that while Trump's trying to push for this America's first in the globe, right? All the people sitting there are probably the weakest people in the globe. You know what I mean? And I think that when competing with Russia, even though Trump could say that Russia's weapons don't work and this and that, it's like, even if he acquires Greenland and the Golden Dome that he wants to build, it won't be enough to prevent whatever he gets himself into with Russia. And I think that the movement into Iran is going to be something to watch still. What do we know about that as we push into Iran?
I can't imagine that Trump wants anything to do with that if he's thinking clearly. The infrastructure to uproot a government and install a Western favorable regime there is gone. The physical infrastructure and the human infrastructure was all identified. It's all uprooted. There's really nothing to work with. So even if you successfully bomb them almost out of existence, there's no way to create a different government there except for boots on the ground. Now, is Russia going to allow that? That's in their backyard. That's their sphere of influence. They didn't allow those protests to get any more out of hand than they got. The ability to shut off Starlink and to break their network in identifying the instigators was almost certainly Russian. The upgraded anti-air systems that they will face, assuming they have the SA-400s and that they're installed, networked, and have the appropriate crews, be they Russian or Iranian, to operate them. This just has really bad idea written all over it. Does that mean we're not going to do it? I don't really know. I like to think that Trump just played Netanyahu and took this effectively off the table. But the thing to look at is, do we keep sending assets over there or not? If it had stopped, I'd say, yeah, that's probably what happened in the background, but it hasn't stopped yet.
Right. And that's kind of the interesting aspect is at what point will Putin say, all right, enough is enough, right? You keep trying to talk to Zelensky, but what's going to happen is I'm going to go ahead and go into essentially go into the Donbass and take that.
Right? Like Odessa would be the big step.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
They haven't slowed down at all. They're just rolling that place up. And keep in mind the length of this front. It is long. And it's had the largest army that NATO has been able to field. It's had all the NATO Wunderwaffe, Challenger tanks, F-16s, and the Russians have just chewed them up. The notion that Russia is weak or is inferior materials there to work with platforms is just not true. Russia is going to keep going. I think they're not interested in going into Europe per se, but they might acquire a significantly larger buffer zone than they currently have.
Okay, what would be the buffer zone? Real
Well,
quick though, let's go ahead and welcome Josh Coburn here to the
hey,
stage. Sir, welcome. Your mic is muted, by the way. We are just in conversation about
guys?
Putin and at what point will he, kind of finish the war with Zelensky. But first, though, welcome to the Dissenting Goyim show. We appreciate you being here.
I lost you there. You still there?
Yes, sir. We're still here. We're still here.
Okay.
Welcome.
You said I heard you say welcome and then it cut out.
We're just welcome. Glad to have you here. Thanks for joining us. We just getting on the topic of Putin and Russia and
I heard you say
Zelensky.
and Zelensky. I heard the elder just mention, the whole idea that Russia has weaker or substandard systems is kind of a joke. And I think that's a funny thing. I've noticed that a lot. There's been a lot of posturing from influencers and especially from, our leadership about the weakness of China and Russia, that it's all kind of a joke, especially in using Venezuela as kind of a example of that, saying it was, oh yeah, there was all Russian systems and everything. But hey, I'm here to listen. I'm here to learn. I only got a little bit.
Yeah, I got you. Well, go ahead, chime in when you want to. Yes. All right. So, I know that's kind of been the scapegoat, right? With Russia, as everything seems to be Russia has bad weapons. Russia failed to do this. Trump talked about it in his speech at Davos and said, "Oh, those anti aircraft missiles went up and then dropped after 30 feet, and they couldn't figure out what was going on." Why?
where exactly did that happen, by the way?
He was just I don't know. At this point, he was rambling in his speech. His speech went on for like an hour and 40 something minutes. And he was talking about how, like, I don't know if he's saying Denmark or he's talking about Russia against Ukraine.
Someone interviewed him after his speech, I think, and in that 20 or 30-minute interview, he mentioned how, oh yeah, the missiles didn't even work. They tried them and they didn't even work. Not only one missile actually got more than 10 feet off the ground, or something, like he said something like that.
Right.
Very interesting.
That happened in Venezuela, I would have to assume.
Venezuela. Yeah, Venezuela.
We don't know. There are different reports there. So one is that the older, I think SA-300 systems, I might be wrong on that. I'm pretty sure I'm right though, were provided to Venezuela, but they were never hooked up. Another version is they were disabled. Then on the security forces, one version is that everyone was bought off by the CIA and turned on Maduro. The other was that we have probably a sonic weapon that made them all sick and they couldn't defend themselves. There were a number of U.S. aircraft that reported to have been hit but not downed. What really happened, I'm not sure. But in the case of Venezuela, that's if anybody thinks that's remotely like facing a Russian force, they're horribly mistaken. The current Russian anti-air systems, two revs ahead that, but they were facing a flotilla that was right off their coast. Air defense works in layers. Say a carrier group going around the Middle East or around China or anywhere in the North Sea could not get within 1,000 kilometers of an area that the Russians intend to defend. It wouldn't be sitting off there almost where you can see them. That's not the way this would work.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to see that, because a lot of times it's like, our equipment can't even keep up with like their submarines that constantly are lost. And the rumors of what happened with Venezuela with like these sonic weapons. It's interesting that you look at that and look at some mythologies, and you're like, that just sounds outlandish. But when it comes to Russia, right, I think that's always the scapegoat. That's always like they just aren't good. They don't have soldiers. In Ukraine, they're fighting with prisoners, and
No,
we've gotten to that point where I
no,
think,
none of that's true.
right. Well, that's the point. I think we've gotten to the point where we created the boogeyman, but then we didn't create a boogeyman enough to where it's like, well, he's the big, enemy of the West, but he can't defend himself.
Well,
It's almost like they, I'll just say the left, just to generalize the left, but a lot of say neocons have demonized Russia over the last 5 years, 6 years. A lot of talk about, oh, they're coming for us, and look what they're doing, aggressing Ukraine and everything. But it's almost like they've now dismantled the fear of Russia. I feel like that's completely been dismantled culturally here. Most people on both sides are not really concerned about anyone. Actually, and that's kind of scary to me. Is that people here are kind of like, oh yeah, well, our military is the best anyways. Even leftists, it's kinda like, yeah, our it's our military. We should go and do this, and it's like, I think we are a little in a bubble, so to speak.
yeah, we are. Let me go back so it's kind of a history podcast. Let me go back in history to Russia. Russia became Gog in the millennialist view of things due to a Scottish preacher during the Crimean War who applied some really kind of convoluted logic to say the Muscovites are the people of Gog and Magog, and that got a accepting audience. And again, this is in the Crimean War. The same logic has continued and been modified slightly and reapplied in the millennialist thinking, where Russia is the villain of the Book of Revelation. Now, meanwhile, you can make a case for that, I suppose, during communist rule, although that was kind of a takeover in itself. But in Russia, you really have a preservation of classical civilization, a lot of church building, kind of a spiritual renaissance. And here in the West, you have, well, yeah, what we got.
Right. So again, like I agree with Josh. We have romanticized, at least our military in a way where it's like we created a boogeyman. Then at some point, and we can go off that that doctrine, so to speak, close to eschatology, right? With the idea that it's like we created the boogeyman, but now we need to change the boogeyman and get that fear out of there, as if we're carrying. Again, I think that it's the other half of that eschatology that you were talking about.
I don't see us changing the boogeyman in the military industrial complex world, which I've lived my bulk of my life as a part of. You have to have a villain, you have to have a threat. And
Right, but then what's the point of having a threat, right, if the threat is weak? Then there's no use of the threat anymore.
Yeah, they'll. I
good
think.
point. Yeah.
I think they're almost. Yeah, That is a good point. I don't see the same type of. I guess. See, growing up in the '90s, it's hard for me to talk about what was politicized. But growing up, I never ever. Actually, there was a time when in my preteens where I had family that traveled to China. So this is 20 years ago. And I would hear about people being like, "Oh, you got to go to China. You got to go to China." That hasn't been the case for what, a dozen years, 15 years now. Like that's not the case. Like people aren't talking about, "Oh, I want to go travel to China." It's not like it's not as much talked about. With how much I feel China is a real threat to the world. In many different ways, and seeing how they took aggressive stances during COVID to gain inroads with leverage, gain inroads to Europe and a lot of other places across the world, which is only a few years ago. I don't see the same type of boogeyman talk about China almost ever, almost ever, at the political level, at the American political level, and that's something that I think is interesting. It's very obvious that the only boogeyman that gets talked about is really Iran. Iran, even though most Americans are not scared of Iran. Americans were scared of Iran when there was the fear in Iraq, the fear of nuclear weapons, WMDs,
Yeah,
which I
which they
think,
didn't have.
which they didn't have, right? So that's
Yeah.
the thing. Like that's what's scary. And I mean, dare I say, I see Netanyahu actually doesn't pull any punches about trying to strike fear into the West or into anyone whenever he's on a pulpit, talking about how scary Qatar is and how dangerous Qatar is and how scary and dangerous Islamists are and Iran is and how it will come for everyone. It will come for you. Like literally, he said stuff like that. I don't see Trump talking like that. I see him coming from a position of strength, but I don't see the leftist leadership in America, in the U.S., and I definitely don't see it at a baseline senator level, or I guess maybe not senator, but Congress level. It's other than Russia, there's no real boogeyman. Maybe Iran. So I think that's interesting. Like talking about if there is an industrial complex, which there is, military industrial complex, then there is common common discussions, common enemies. There has to be an enemy, right, for it to justify our pushing ourselves to the brink, investing deeper into defense and the money. And I only see it on Russia. So that's something that I've always thought is interesting because I don't see Russia as an enemy. I just don't personally. Um,
I don't think any person really that can think about that, right? Could see Russia really as an enemy, right? They didn't. I mean, it wasn't. It was really under the Soviets, which that was like, oh, they're going to take over the world, right? But then we paid for that, and I think that from this new position that Putin's in, who's been a really good, really wise, really smart leader, and made his moves really strategically, didn't thump his chest about it, but just is. I mean, listen to him talk, right? I mean, obviously I don't speak Russian, but even with the translations, it's never, he's never thumping his chest. He's honestly concerned with a lot of things. And if you listen to Alexander Dugin, it's the same thing, right? It's talking about we need to quit whatever we're doing and we need to start moving forward. This world is being torn apart. There is a group within this world that want this world to fail, right? But that group is the same group that is like, oh, Russia's the boogeyman. And if you really look back, the irony there is, you look at the actual myth of the Magog people, it's them who came down from Eastern Europe, not Russia, but it's that are what we call the children of Israel. Though the mixed multitude is really where it's at. Um, yeah, nobody sees Russia. Well, nobody that with a brain can see Russia as an enemy. I know James the Elder, you have watched this evolve over a while now from your childhood. What do you think? How do we the new generation, so Josh and I, we're kind of seeing it differently, but how do we get your generation to understand that, or is that just a done deal, no questions asked?
No,
Enemy.
it's not a done deal. People can always be prompted to question their beliefs. The problem is that so many people of my age grew up on the idea that Russia was the evil excuse for everything. They were the reason there's a Cold War. They're the justification for the military industrial complex. So we need that to fight the Russians. They were just the justification for everything. And the kind of crazy thing about how that developed, the Trotskyites, particular, I won't differentiate them and the Leninites, but that was I say British associated, largely Jewish revolution in Russia. Then when Stalin came in, he purged most of that. And where'd a lot of the people that were purged from the Russian Trotskyites go? Well, they went to Canada and they went to the United States and they wound up in academic institutions and government positions. They became the neoconservatives. That's the great irony of the whole deal here.
so that irony is I'll say concerning when someone starts going down a rabbit hole trying to understand why we are where we are. But that type of what's it called? Starts with an M, amalgamation, I guess. But there's an M word for it, where everything melds together. The culture is all melded together. I mean, I have. This is something that you guys would have far more historical angles to come from. It seems like we're kind of a new Rome. I mean, people have talked about that. And if you grew up in an evangelical, non-denominational church in the U.S., at some point, we're kind of likened to Rome in a lot of teachings. Generally, not like not very strong teachings, but we're likened to Rome. I feel like we are kind of a new Rome in that a lot of the Nazis, same way. You're talking about the Leninites and the Trotskyites being integrated. A lot of Nazis got integrated. Scientists, military men, a lot of them
Operation
had to.
Paperclip.
Yeah, paperclip. So this is kind of the thing. And so, going in and establishing our interests in Venezuela. Yeah, I found myself thinking, I was texting with Justin and talking with Justin. I found myself thinking, like, okay, what is the moral position here? Did we go and invade and kill a lot of people? Not, no. We took out a leader who is highly, I guess, contested. Right? There's a lot of information showing that he's pretty crooked, pretty bad guy, very much behind a lot of narco stuff. However, we went in, took him out, and then said, "Hey, we're in control now until you guys get a new leader all set up, and we're also going to take this oil." And we're going to make sure that China doesn't establish itself here. Is that morally good or morally bad? And I have a hard time answering that question. I think it's actually generally morally good if we're not going in and destroying them. But not that's not the America that we've grown up with. That's a change into a more Rome conquering. We're going to go conquer something type way about it. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's all just fresh because it was a couple weeks ago.
If you look at other things, we've done this over and over. It just maybe didn't generally
less
didn't receive as much
le-
acknowledgement.
less effective, maybe. less quick.
It might have been less quick, or it didn't require as many resources. You didn't have a battle group fighting around South America. They tended to be things that were smaller and just easier to look the other way on. These have never worked out very good for the people in the country that's conquered, to say the least. I don't know that they've worked out very good for the American people in a broad sense either. They worked out well for certain commercial interest? Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. Right.
How will this be? I don't really know. But the other interesting thing is ExxonMobil didn't want anything to do with this. They don't see Venezuela as being an economically viable thing to invest in. So
Is that a public? Have they made that publicly?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they walked away from it. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, 'cause from the way I understand it, you could probably answer this or clarify this. Is that the type of oil that Venezuela has? Of course, it still has immense value, but cost, the
Yeah.
cost of harvesting it is significant. And so it's like, is it is it really for the oil if we actually can't? I'm saying harvest, but build the infrastructure to actually make it a viable investment.
Yeah,
And
it's
so,
it's it's heavy oil, and right now it only makes up 0.75% of the world's oil production.
yeah,
Uh,
that's pretty important, but it's kind of a future, it's more of a future resource then, right?
What? Yeah.
maybe.
It takes a lot though. They gotta overhaul a lot of the refineries anyway. And it's financially tough. Obviously, even for the oil companies who do make a lot of money. But that's not the most important thing that took place with that change, though. As we come to find out, right, the meeting with Netanyahu, and then you have the Venezuela operation, that they had somebody lined up
Yeah.
for that spot, and Trump said, "Nah,
Yeah, we're not. He said no. We're not going to put her. She's not
yeah,
going to be in.
we're
Right.
not putting that
No.
in." Now, a lot of people speculate that he either thought that through, or it's the simple case of we don't want the chaos that comes with the leadership change, especially if people start to know who that lady is. Um, so it's almost it's interesting with all these things, and then then you had the Exxon Mobil just jump out and say, sorry, we're not part of this either.
It
What do you
seems like
think of this
high
whole thing?
risk with an awful lot of unknowns.
Yeah, it seems like they got partially through. I know I was listening to some guys like, well, Trump just gives the military more freedom to have that operation, and they okay it, and it's like this one was partially played out in his mind. So when we talk about the failure of the game, right? I know James the Elder there. The 5D thing. It's like this is where that breaks down, right? He gave the okay for a partial plan and didn't get that far. Was he expecting something else to be different with that?
I,
Right?
I
Was
don't
he
see
was he
the end.
expecting every oil company to jump in there and say, "Hell yeah, let's rock and roll"?
Going back to the moral concept, I have a real problem of attacking somebody that hasn't attacked me. So I apply my individual Christian morals to a nation state. I tend to do that. Is that good or bad? That's my choice. But in this case, looking at it as an amoral decision, I'm not seeing the strategy. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see what the end game is.
This is where, like I said earlier, I think it was just a show of force. I think he didn't need to think it. He didn't want to think it through the rest. Well, not that he didn't want to. He didn't think it through the rest of the way. All in his mind was this was the chest thump. This was the look what I can do in that amount of time.
I don't
What
know.
about did we? There's been a lot of talk of like, oh, China was going to establish itself with Venezuela and do some big oil deals there. Was that? Is there credence to that? Is that?
Yeah, there is credence to it, but China has done a lot of other things. China doesn't have any history of invading foreign countries. This period, they don't. Uh, but they normally have a way to get back at you. And Larry Johnson's one of the commentators I follow quite a bit. He was writing on that yesterday. China's done a lot of things in the background now. A lot of it had to do with currency that will hurt us far more than whatever we hurt them in doing this.
Yeah, the China thing seemed like one of those. I don't know. I always feel like China's the redheaded stepchild when it comes to the boogeyman, right? It's like, oh, there's the boogeyman. Then they got like the redhead stepchild over here, where it's like, and China, right? And if we obviously the the amount of damage we've done to China, but I think that with China, it wasn't enough to say we need to go in there and take Maduro. I think it was more credible to say that he was someone who called Netanyahu out for being essentially for being a fake Jew, right? I think that's more credible than the idea that China was going to go in there and control some kind of
Well,
economy.
they were making economic footholds or gains in Latin America in general. One of the things that prompted the U.S. involvement in World War II was the level of success that Nazi Germany had in creating economic inroads throughout South America as well. Yeah, I know. Something I mentioned last time, just for references, Maduro is a Sephardic Jew.
That's true. That's
Yeah,
verified.
yeah,
Verified, yeah. And
yeah.
he has tons of comments against Netanyahu.
I've seen that. I've seen some of the stuff on the comments. It usually comes up as I'll just say I'll just say anti-Semitic type posts that are pretty aggressive, saying like, "Oh, that's the only reason he got taken out." And it's like, well, there could be credence to that if he was a part of a larger picture that no one really is talking about. If he himself is Jewish and he actually has major expectations of running Venezuela that he's not owning up to, and he's turning on some type of system that he is supposed to owe allegiance to. I'm using words that are kind of, I guess, ignorant to it. Then yeah, I guess it would make sense
Well, he
for Israel to
did.
be like, no, let's shut him up.
So he did. I would say that every leader in Venezuela did kick the system there because they did not have a Rothschild ran bank.
Right. That's
So I
one of the
think I
countries that doesn't have a
yeah. So I,
Rothschild.
I think when it came down to it, that's more of a credence than as far as why that took place. But I think it really between that and a show of force. And again, the oil is just
That's all it
difficult too.
takes.
Yeah.
Like,
The oil,
are we saying
yeah.
that's all it takes to
Yeah.
overthrow a government?
Yeah, I really do. I think that was him thumping his chest. Right. And if you look at the Davos speech, it's really just him shaking his dick at everybody. That's all the speech was.
Yeah, it didn't. It the fact that it ended up with some type of agreement with Denmark or whatever, or the head of NATO, whatever, whoever it is, and is it Rourke or something like that?
Yeah.
It ended up with an agreement where we're able to establish our military as much as we want on Greenland, and that's that. Like, it's like, huh, after all of that. But that's kind of like, that's also kind of in the art of the deal. The art of the deal is all about making, you make an outlandish demand or claim, and then say why it should be that way, and then your plan was to settle somewhere in the middle the whole time.
And
Um,
that could be a perfectly good explanation. The thing that I'd be concerned with there is that sort of posturing relative to, say, a conservative American culture. That's not how John Wayne does things.
No, I think that's a good point though. I think that's why I brought up the idea of he didn't say Americans first. He said America first, and with that speech he talked about it was America first in the globe. It was not by any means what we thought we were voting for, and he said the right rhetoric, which was the important thing here. I think that we all got fooled a little bit because in our minds we translate. That's the idyllic nature of the republic, right? We think of the constitutional republic, so we think naturally with the idea. Someone says America first, we're thinking, oh, sweet, it's the American Republic, the Constitution, the people.
People,
And I think that's why they throw out that stupid word, the democracy, which is dumb, and anybody that uses it needs to be slapped. But I think when it comes down to it, he really in this speech. This is why I like this Devo, and why I brought this up with the polarity of the world. He was not at all talking about that. His America first was him and his group of buddies, his donors, essentially showing that look at this country that we control is not just first in the world. It will come out on top as first in the polarity, whether or not we keep the unipolar world. I don't believe we will. I think at the end of it, Trump will show that he's stronger and willing to do more things than the other weaker European countries, and he'll end up we'll end up with a multipolar world. I think we always will because, Putin's not conceding anything. But again, Venezuela was showing, and almost you could look like, did he parallel Venezuela to these European countries? Was it like you guys are just as weak as this guy in this country in South America, right? If I did that quick, I could do anything I want to. And again, that's where we see that separation and we see this battle. We see the merchant war. We finally see it in real time. Where do we go?
yeah. So the American buddies. So Canada has also been positioning itself as making some very strong statements to allying with China, and that in so many words, the alliance or the agreements with America, with the U.S., are failing. I mean, he was using some strong language. Um, what's his name, Mister? I don't know, Mister Banker. He was a banker, heading the PM of Canada. So I thought that was
Carney,
interesting.
Mark
That
Carney.
Carney going into Davos, I thought that was interesting, and the timing of Venezuela lines up too with this. So that, I mean, that kind of gives credence to what you're saying, that it was the whole thing is him beating his chest, or
Yeah.
that's a big reason. I gotta get my charger here.
Yeah. All right, guys. So we got to start wrapping up this segment here, but I'm going to bring on the Charles E. Smith Jr. Do you have any comments before we wrap this part of the show up?
Well, I say this. I was listening to you guys, and the one thing is when they look at takeovers, everyone looks at takeovers as kind of a whole military boots on the ground thing. And when you look at China, I think what it is, the takeover, it's about economic thing. And that's what people don't look at. It's people look at force, but a lot of times it's economic. When you look at what they did during COVID, I think one thing is, and where China has an advantage over a lot of different nations is the Chinese government, they will do whatever, whenever, at whatever cost to their own nation to get whatever economic gain they want. So it doesn't matter the raping and pillaging of their land, the killing off of animals, citizens dying. It does not matter to them. I think they've shown over the years when it comes down to them getting the economic control that they want. And that's where they have an edge over just a lot of people, a lot of governments, is because we have all the touchy-feely stuff going on. And I don't mean to, because you should consider all the different things, how it's going to impact your people, your wildlife, the land, and all those type of things. But China, when it comes down to wanting something, they will do, it doesn't matter. It's at any cost. It may take them a few years, but it doesn't matter. That's the difference with China and everyone else. Really, they will just dogged determination. The end justifies the means, and that is that.
China's not constrained by their population. They don't have this really crazy dysfunctional political process. They basically have a ruling elite, and they say that, and which allows them to have long-term strategies, and everything's about economic power.
They don't have the EPA breathing down their neck if they want to do something.
No,
there's none of that. None of these little special interest groups or anything else they have to worry about. They can go after whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, and there is no one to stand in their way. That's the difference, and that's where they have an edge, is they can just make the most cold-hearted decisions ever, and there is no one there in their country to stop them at all. Period. It is.
I didn't even understand how deep that goes until I saw on one, not to change the subject in any way, there's a documentary called One Child Nation, and it's about China and their one child policy. I mean, the implications on your entire populace, like the implications is the immorality of how they instituted that, and then how their government was involved with essentially trafficking the babies that were being left on the side of the road into orphanages and into places where they would a lot of times they'd die, but many times they'd just be sold to the first world, and then the government was making all that money. That's pretty insane. We're talking about massive immorality, like at the government level.
Right. That's what I try to say when I talk about China is I'm talking about the government, not the citizens. You know how people are about, Asian hate or whatever. I'm talking about the rulers, the ruling people of China, and they operate with absolute impunity, a lack of morality, or anything else. They flat out do not care. The end justifies the means, no matter the cost. 100,000, 1 million people died. They don't care. They have something in mind. They're going to do it, and that's the end. And plus, they cut off the whole flow of news. How do you find out about anything that happens in China? They don't allow them to have the internet. They can't be organized. The people don't know a lot of things. Anything you hear is just rumors and possible rhetoric. Is it true? Is it not true? We'll never know because they don't have a free flow of information. And when I speak out against China, it's the Chinese government. I have nothing against the people at all. And I do love orange chicken like everybody else.
Yeah.
There's a video.
That's my favorite.
There's a video out there of a woman who she's Chinese, but she's in the US, and she says she's done every type of mathematical look at it. And by every calculation, China has no more than, I think it's like 900 million people in it. And
Yeah.
so it's actually like, it's a big lie that they have, what is it, 1.7 billion or 1.9 billion,
Mhm.
whatever immense amount they say they have. They have essentially just over what the U.S. has. And
Yep.
it's because of massive genocide. And they just lie. They just lie.
Well, it's
All
like
right.
that Chinese gymnast said at the Olympics when they asked her how old she was, and she says, "I'm as old as my birth certificate says I am." That's China in a nutshell, right there. That's all you need to know.
Yeah. All right. I know we could, if we want any more about China, I guess we could talk to Erica Kirk about her pretend trip to China too, huh? Hey, all right. Any closing thoughts on any closing thoughts on this segment before we switch over to our
I got one thing to ask because you brought it up. The defense of Tyler Robinson, it seems to be at least somewhat capable, but one of the things they filed identified a undisclosed explosive object used in the crime. Follow
Oh,
that.
they really, so we're finally seeing that lapel mic, huh?
Follow that. That will be interesting. It's been very
Oh.
quiet, but it won't. Time's coming when it won't be, when this starts to.
It was acoustics. It was acoustics engineers identified that there's an explosive on the audio by cross-referencing audio.
Yeah.
Good point. Wow. No, I hadn't heard that. This is good. This is going to get interesting.
I hope so.
Right.
I hope it gets interesting. I feel like it's just going to be a bunch of Fed slop, and it's going to go nowhere. I don't think it's going to get. I don't think it's going to convince us citizens of anything.
Well, we will see. They did not close the courtroom, so that's cool. And we'll probably touch on that next week. So, James the Elder, Josh, and Charles E. Smith, I appreciate y'all hanging out on this newscast podcast, the Dissenting Goyim Show episode, I believe 5. Are we at 5? We're 5, right?
Wait a minute. Is that the show I just fell into?
Yeah, that's the show you just actually walked into. And
Josh
hey,
has a nice little Jimmy Neutron thing going on there on his head there. I like that.
Yeah, I see the hair.
Yeah.
I see the hairdo. All right. Anyway, here we go. Yes, thank you for walking onto the set, Josh, and contributing well. Anyway, this episode will be up on YouTube. It'll be up on Rumble, Substack. We'll throw it out there, and we are adding it to Apple Podcasts so that if you're in your car and you want to hear our shenanigans, and our James the Elder's wisdom once more, well, you will find us there. So thank you for being here tonight, and now we are moving on to the next segment. I appreciate y'all.